thank you for all for making the time to jump into this Dr. NAACLS, where we're going to talk about Standard 2. So let's go ahead and get started with the mission. NAACLS is committed to being the premier accrediting agency for ensuring the advancement of education in clinical laboratory sciences and related healthcare disciplines provided by domestic and international programs. Our vision is for medical laboratories to preferentially seek graduates of NAACLS programs to ensure quality, value, innovation, and safety for healthcare consumers. And our values are quality, education, innovation, collaboration, peer review, and global accreditation. And I think a lot of our discussions today around Standard 2 will really tie back to innovation. Just to kind of timestamp this, since many of you probably know, we upload this to the NAACLS News, and it kind of lives on YouTube. So we want to timestamp this because our compliance requirements can change up to twice a year. So with that in mind, if you are watching this down the road, especially if you're watching this after April, when our board meets next, please just double check that the compliance requirements haven't drastically changed. You can find updated documents on the NAACLS website, and you can always contact NAACLS staff to make sure you have the appropriate documents. Joining me today is Janice Conway. Janice is currently a member of RCAP. She's previously served on PARC, so she's been a very involved volunteer for NAACLS for quite some time, and she's very well versed on the subject. So let's talk about Standard 2, specifically continuous quality improvement. For the sake of this discussion, we can have many nuanced discussions about Standard 2, but for the sake of today and to try to focus it, we're really going to focus on collecting graduate feedback and collecting employer feedback. So Janice, before we launch into this, broadly speaking, is there anything you want to kind of give an overview of collecting graduate feedback and employer feedback?
Well, I just wanted to say basically that there's lots of ways to collect it. It's not just all surveys. And the other thing is, as laboratorians, we all know that if it's not written down, as it was in my old day, but nowadays, if it's not documented somewhere electronically or in writing, it didn't happen. So a lot of this is really just about making sure you have your documentation. Okay, so why don't you go back just a bit, Mark, and I'll talk about the surveys. Most of us use surveys for this, and surveys are great. However, we also know that survey response rates can be really poor, or sometimes the surveys are only the people who want to complain or only the people who are really excited. You're not getting a full array or display of what's going on in your program. So surveys are great and you can use those, but you probably should use some kind of supplementary material as well. And it's important not just to do the survey, but to analyze what's there. Next slide. So go ahead.
Sorry. So the compliance guide does have some examples. So we'll move beyond the compliance guide a little bit, but right now, do you kind of want to highlight what is in the compliance guide and kind of where to start with some places to gather feedback?
Yeah. The compliance guide is something you should be absolutely wedded to. I have to tell you, it has so many bits of good information. First of all, it often explains the standard a little bit more than just the standard language sentence that it has. And number two, it gives you some examples of what you might be asked to provide in a self-study and what you might be asked to provide for a site visit. So it's really important that you kind of switch your role and look at yourself as an inspector. What am I supplying? Can I prove, can I document what I'm doing? And so that's why the compliance guide is really important for that factor. So rely on that resource as well. Excellent.
So I think one thing that we can do a better job highlighting today is documenting informal discussions.
Right.
I think a lot of time when people think of documentation, they think of minutes of meetings, specifically the advisory committee, which we'll get to later. But can you speak to more about this concept of maybe informal documentation, for lack of a better term, and as a reviewer, kind of what you're looking for through these documentation methods?
Certainly. Emails are a great source, but even if you had a phone call or even a set of text messages, what often helps is to reply back with an email just saying, hi, Mark, how are you? Thank you for meeting with me today or talking with me today. I just want to make sure I have captured the nuggets of our conversation. You know, you were giving us feedback about X. We talked about student Y, you know, and this, that, just a quick summary. Let me know if you have any other questions. Please contact me anytime. That document actually gives you some really important things that are for documentation. Number one, it says who you talked with. Number two, it says when you talked with them, what date. And it also tells when you say who you talked with, where they were at, because if their email is basically their work email, it tells you what location they were in. And then also your summary gives the topic area that you were talking about, which is great.
So now that we kind of have the general idea and the concept of this informal kind of documentation, it really opens up additional methods and pathways to gather feedback. We've highlighted some of those here. Janice, can you go into a little more detail about some of these other possibilities?
Sure. So most of us are, you know, we're doing affiliate visits of some kind. If you're a hospital-based program, that might be going to the 4th floor instead of where you are on the 2nd floor, but you're doing some kind of a visit with your affiliate group. For us in Minnesota, where it's phone calls and or Zoom meetings most of the time, because we're not going to travel 5 hours across the state in the wintertime in Minnesota, but we'll do a Zoom with our sites and we're getting some feedback. Maybe it's just checking in with them to see how the students are doing in the rotations, but it's also, hey, how are things going? Do you have any recommendations for improving the program? Just a simple question like that can give you a lot of information. There might also be students working on the bench that when you go out to physically visit that are your alumni. So, you know, say, hi, how are you? You know, how's it going? You know, now that you're out here working, got any recommendations? Are there things going well? Those types of things. Could also be your state meeting or a CE event where you run into people, you know, just ask them a few questions conversationally, buy them a coffee. That always helps, especially if it's a nice latte or something like that. So, but keeping it informal, but then documenting back again, as we talked about, with some kind of an email or trace of some kind to show that you actually did have this conversation.
So when we discussed putting together this presentation, Janice, you brought up how clinical evaluation forms may be able to be used in this method as well. This was completely new to me. I've never been an educator, so I thought this was interesting and something I hadn't really heard highlighted in the past.
Well, this actually was a result of one of our problems that we had, in that we ran into one of our major affiliate sites refusing to allow employees to give any feedback about people who were currently employed there, citing HR law. And we're like, oh, great, now we can't get our employer feedback. But what we decided to do is we added a little nugget to our clinical evaluation form and said, if there was a position available, would you recommend this student for possible hire? And if also asking them why or why not, gave us some feedback from a potential employer. It wasn't our sole source, but for that particular site, we were kind of limited for a few years until we find a way to get around their information. But it's also, when you're looking at your students, the evaluation forms at the end of the semester, are you seeing some trends? Are you seeing some issues that pop up? That, even though it's not a formal, like I'm looking for your feedback, they're giving you feedback about the students that you can use to help improve your program. And when you evaluate those, did you make a change? If you make a change, document what that change was, and then check those same forms next semester or the next time of the clinical and see whether or not that has improved. Has it improved it? Did it help at all? Are there further problems? You know, those types of things. So again, checking it next time gives you that close the loop opportunity.
So let's speak, as we mentioned before, more about the minutes of the meeting. The advisory committee can be a very powerful tool in multiple standards, but specifically with this standard, what are some ways that you've successfully seen it utilized?
What we've seen, what really seems to work is if you focus on the NAACLS standards, the things that you need to comply with. We report out to our advisory committee what our findings are, what our graduation rates are, what our employment rates are, and what our BOC pass rates are. But we also give them the sub-discipline because they like to see that their students in micro are doing really well, those types of things. But it's also an opportunity for them to ask specifically questions about our graduate survey, our graduate rate, our graduation rate, our pass rate, our employment rate, those types of things. And then we capture those questions that they bring back to us at that time. The key thing, though, when you're preparing your advisory committee minutes, it's really important to make sure that you have the date, not necessarily the time, but the date on there that you actually met, the individuals that are involved. You can't just say faculty and preceptors. You have to actually have names of people, because as a review committee member, I want to see that the people who are at this meeting represent an array of people that are informing about your program. So you really are getting valid feedback. The other thing that's happened is that some of our preceptors are now some of our graduates. And so that gives an opportunity to get some feedback from graduates as well. Again, are there any changes planned? Make some minutes at the end about the summary action steps, and then how you're going to check those for the next time. What I then tend to do is put those back on my agenda for the next year right away.
One thing that I've heard come up in different contexts of workshop I've attended and stuff like that, that applies here and to other standards, is that while it's not a requirement, I think it would behoove programs to put things in common terms that NAACLS reviewers and review committee members will understand.
Right.
So if you have a part of your review committee, I'm sorry, if you have a part of your advisory committee meeting where you're discussing outcomes, if you're discussing changes made to a program, or any kind of common NAACLS verbiage, use that verbiage, because then you're eliminating any kind of sense of confusion for our reviewers.
That's exactly right. It really helps if we can, because we zone in on those key words, if you will. So if you say you're looking at your graduation rate, then that we know right away that you've discussed your graduation rate. You can use attrition as well, but it's really important to use some of those key terms to help us, shall we say, tick the boxes that indeed you did talk about your graduates and your employment rates. Really important.
So now that we've talked about gathering the information and gathering the data and all of the potential flexibility you have in gathering all of it, let's talk about assessment modification. I think another thing that there seems to be a little bit of confusion on is that a perception that if you are a clean program, meaning you have perfect benchmarks, you have a outstanding maximum accreditation award, you don't need to modify and change. So that is a misconception. So Janice, would you kind of like to talk about how our highly successful programs can still take advantage of assessment and modification?
Well, I like to focus on sometimes the employment rate, because most of us know that our students are getting jobs. And there's some of those students that graduated from your program and you went, oh my God, he got a job. Okay, well, so yes, they're employed because there's a shortage and everybody's getting a job. And so you can tick that box as 100% employment rate. But are there areas of strength and weakness with those graduates when they go out there to the employment site that could be helpful for you for improving the program? So when you're looking at your graduation rate, 100%, yes, all the students graduated, but they're not happy. There's something that's, a pebble in their shoe that they'd like to talk to you about, or they'd like you to improve. So asking those questions about, do you have any suggestions for improvement, not just the Likert scale ratings, but do you have any suggestions for improvement with an open text box, is really helpful. Is there one area of the board exam scores that are higher than the others or lower than the others? You should probably investigate that. So even though it's 100% pass rate, it may not be best in all areas. And I'll give you an example. My program, they take immunology in the fall semester of their junior year. They take transfusion medicine in spring semester of their senior year, right before they go to clinicals. So guess which one is their highest level of on their board exams? It's blood bank typically, and immunology is one of our weaker spots. So we decided we needed to put some reviews in before they went to clinicals to make sure that they were up to. But until we talked with the students about this, we didn't know that. even though we had 100% board exam pass rate. The other thing is you've 5 out of 5 on your employer survey, but did you really ask the right questions that you need to know? Is there something else? Did you add a text box to let them freeform an improvement thing back to you? We also have one other thing I forgot to put on here is that we sometimes do a focus group with our students in the middle of the semester. And one of the things I tell them is that, okay, you're a program director for today. You are a program director, you are in charge, or even tell them they're the dean for the day. You're president of the university. What would you recommend to change for the program? And we ask them to put this in anonymously, fill it on a piece of paper and collect them all at the front. They get a lot of feedback that way. Get a lot of feedback that you didn't expect. Even though it's a perfect program, 100% board exam, 100% employment, 100% graduation rate, there's still some tweaks that you might be able to do.
And before we go to the next slide, I do want to highlight that if you're a high performing program, just because you are required to modify your program, we're not looking for you to upset the apple cart. You're successful. We just want to see that you're continually trying to get better.
Yeah, just continue on that, tweaking it up a little bit. Doesn't have to be a major thing. It can be very simple. But adding those little things in and try them. Even if they doesn't make any impact, you at least try to do something to improve your program.
I think that's a helpful point, and I was making sure it wasn't on this slide, but before we continue, I think that's something we can also just be very transparent about too. The standard requires attempts and modification.
Right.
It doesn't have to be successful, and you won't be dinged if it's not successful. So the idea is you're making changes, you're assessing those changes, and then you're closing the loop, which I will just transition directly to you about this, Janice.
So this is a key thing that we struggle with in RCAP with the review committee. We also struggle with it as program directors. I've seen it on our listserv. I've seen it on Facebook and Instagram where people are struggling with how to meet these requirements. But it's important to think about it just the way we think about bench QC. And I'll use this parallel so you can kind of get the idea of the concept. Your high range QC is not in, and you've tried it and it's not in. Okay, so what are you going to do to change that? That's your issue. That's your recommendation for change. And so what did you do? You might have rerun them and now they're in. You might have allocated a new lot of reagents, et cetera, for your QC and run those again, but you did something to make a change. And now you run your QC again and your QC is correct. That's the close the loop. You've had an issue, you did an action, you checked to make sure that it worked or didn't work. That's closing the loop. So think about it just like you would your bench QC. You're just reassessing the resource that gave you the flag in the first place. And like we just talked about, it may not be that there's any change. If you tried something simple and you thought, well, it's improvement, maybe it's satisfaction, but it didn't change your board exam scores. And that's fine. Satisfaction is, underrated sometimes. Student satisfaction is huge. So, those are things that we do. And here are some examples that we had. Students habitually arriving late to clinicals because they thought it didn't matter. I mean, there's going to be people there 24/7, so they can show up 10 minutes late, half hour late, no big deal. This was a long time ago, but we did an action plan was to have a pre-clinical orientation. We had one already, but this time we really stressed attendance. And one of the things we did was bring one of our clinical people in to say, if you're a probationary employee and you have X number of tardies during your probation period, you're not hired on a permanent basis. That was a real, shall we say, epiphany for some of these students. But now that's part of our routine and we don't have that problem anymore. So when we get back to our reviews the next year, all students were on time, no issues with attendance and tardiness. Our student surveys showed us that they wanted more information before they went to their clinical sites about instrumentation. And if your program is like mine, we have a few small instruments, but we can't afford the big ones, let's face it. And even if somebody donated it to us, can't afford the reagents. So we started putting videos from the vendors into our courses. And we had some of our clinical people come in and talk about how they work with the instruments and how they do their preventive maintenance. The students in our graduate surveys the next year really liked having that added They felt that they were much more comfortable about instrumentation. So very simple, didn't really change the curriculum, just added links to videos on YouTube and it was good to go.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to transition into kind of the resources available. If you have further questions about standard 2 or any other standards, if anybody hears a loud banging, it's because my steam heat in my apartment has decided to kick in. So I promise you I'm not under any kind of attack. So as far as resources you have as a program director, if you have questions for NAACLS, you obviously have access to staff as well as review committee chairs and our board president. You see all of those individuals right here. Specifically to assist program directors with standard interpretation is a very specific kind of review committee member that we call discipline lead persons. So discipline lead persons are specific content experts in their field that serve on the review committees. You can find their contact information on our website. So if you go to the program directors page and you scroll down, you'll see a series of small tabs with pictures of NAACLS staff members and our DLPs. Those are the people you want to get a hold of. For example, you'll see Janice's picture there under the medical laboratory microbiologist because she is our MLM educator on RCAP. So as I said, they are available for standard interpretation. We try to limit requests such as, hey, can you review this progress report or look at the self-study, just because that kind of shifts into some conflict of interest with consulting. Plus that can lead to kind of a extensive workload. But if you have one question about a specific standard, maybe what kind of documentation or narrative elements that a reviewer may be looking for, DLPs can be really helpful in those specific circumstances. All the people you see here are NAACLS volunteers. We are a volunteer-driven organization. We couldn't do anything without the volunteers. So I always like to take this opportunity to thank volunteers, such as Janice, for lending their time and expertise to the organization. And finally, before we'll get to Q&A, and Q&A can either be done through raising your hand and we can bring up audio or Zoom. And I also have the little Q&A chat box open. We can take questions that way. I just want to let you know some reminders of things we have coming up. Obviously, CLEC is coming up, so there's a lot of stuff going on with CLEC, which I'll get to in a little bit. We're nearing the end of our nomination window for review committee members or board members. So the specific details about that are in the NAACLS news. The article may be buried a little bit at this time because we've had a lot of content coming out about program advocacy. But there's until April 1st. If you know somebody that would be good in those positions, or if you're interested, self-nominations are completely welcome. If you have any questions about that, you can check out the NAACLS news, or you can contact me by the phone or email. I'd be happy to help. As I referenced, and if you probably noticed, in 2025, we've had a advocacy series, a NAACLS news series dedicated to program advocacy, where we kind of started at a very broad perspective about how other accreditors kind of handle resources and things of that nature. And through each subsequent article, kind of gotten more narrow and shifting to more practical advice. We just had one post yesterday written by a former park chair about her, who's now in more of a higher administration role, but she gave her experience as kind of both of a program director, a NAACLS reviewer, and now somebody administration, about ways to generate data-driven requests. Our CEO, Marissa James, and our board president, Robert Cottrell, will be having a breakout session at CLEC focused on kind of broadly speaking advocacy for programs. And then this whole series will culminate in the next Dr. NAACLS, where we're going to get as many of those authors in one place to kind of have a round table where we'll quickly kind of review those articles, but we want to make as many of those people available as possible to answer questions and give their perspective about program advocacy. Registration for the workshop is currently open. That registration closes on February 27th. The date of the workshop is the first day of CLEC, the morning. I don't have that date off the top of my head, but it is a hybrid workshop. Full information on our website. For those of you who are going to CLEC and assuming that that registration will include the NAACLS workshop, it will not. It's a separate registration. It's a separate fee. ASCLS is kind enough to let us use some of their facilities, but it's not directly incorporated in their registration. We will have kind of an article on the NAACLS News on March 3rd, which is the Monday before CLEC, about kind of last second details if you want to find us in Atlanta, where our booth is going to be, when program services members are available. Everybody seems to want to find Russ and talk to Russ, so you'll be able to tell when Russ is going to be at the booth. So if you have MLT questions or you just want to say hi to him, he's a pleasant fellow, you can do so at those times. So we do have a few questions in the chat. First one came pretty early in the presentation. So Natalie, if I misunderstand your meeting, please add another question. But she asked, surveys hyphen an alternative resource was mentioned. What would be an example? And I think when we kind of set up the beginning of this presentation and said, yeah, you can do surveys, but there's a lot of other alternatives, it was really kind of setting the stage for the rest of this presentation. So the other resources were getting across the idea of informal documentation, kind of avenues that opens up of like in-person communication and a way to document that. Janice, do you have any additions to that first question?
The only thing I might add to that is that sometimes when you've had one of these conversations with your affiliates and you know, you actually have one-on-one chance to talk with them, you can say in that reply email, hey, can I send you the survey and would you mind filling it out for me, because that really helps me with my NAACLS accreditation. That might be a way of one-on-one reaching out to them to make sure that they do the survey for you. So yeah, I think we covered most of the alternative ways of capturing. Again, it's not just you can use the survey, but you can also use conversations, Zoom meetings, emails back and forth. A lot of ours is done by email.
And it's important to say that this was not a comprehensive list.
No, there's all kinds of ideas.
Yeah, if you think of items that weren't included on this, don't assume they would not be accepted. I think to kind of tie it back to how Janice started it is that if it's not documented, it's not done. So we just wanted to kind of discuss all of the possibilities of how to document this and let your imagination go wild. Let's go to
I see the next one is like, how do you review graduation rates if they are 100%? And do you just show that students are graduating each year? Well, yes, I do. But I also, as a program director, I also look at of those students who are graduating. This is for my university, not necessarily for NAACLS, but I include it in my NAACLS report. Are my students all A and B students, or do I have some people who are struggling? And if they're struggling, you know, what was the reason for their struggle? Or did I have, you know, some students who passed it the second time? So those kind of questions that you can do for your graduation rate review are mostly qualitative, not quantitative. So, you know, are there, this year there's a whole bunch of C students. Last year there was a whole bunch of A and B students. You know, that changes it, even though they all graduated. That's a little bit shift in how things are happening.
We have somebody raising their hands, so.
Yep, I see another one there. Okay, so the hand raise is Stacy.
Yep, you are allowed to talk, Stacy, if you unmute.
Stacy, are you there? You can unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
great.
Your question, please.
I didn't have a question. Did something happen? I'm sorry.
You raised your hand, or perhaps it captured your hand being raised if it was close to your screen. So
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Completely fine.
That happens a lot. Okay, let's see. Next question. Was actually probably to you, Mark. When will the standard 8 matrix be available for download?
So our review committees at our February meeting just did a final quality assurance check on the forms, but they do need to be approved by the board. So we're expecting to release those forms by the end of May. I'm guessing probably early May, but there's a lot of staff tasks after board meetings because we're also kind of serving a couple other cycles. So by the end of May, definitely will be the new standard 8 matrix. Have we considered combining the standards document with the compliance guide? We have. The challenge there is that changes to the standards require a formal process to change. There's a public comment process for anything substantive. There is not a public comment process for the standard compliance guide.
Right.
So when we first came up with the standard compliance guide with the 2012 standards, it was thought that it may get confusing about what items could need to go to public comment, which are not. So that's why the standards are standalone in a formal document. And the compliance guide is a living document, which is separate. Next one, we're going to do
Yeah.
Erica, and then if somebody else has their hands up. So we'll do Erica,
Okay.
then we'll go to Gloria.
Okay.
So Gloria, get ready. So Erica's question is, if you add a new technology for a new class, what is the best way to assess if it quote unquote worked, since the new students did not have the course without the new technology?
Technology. In that case, what you want to show is that it didn't have a negative impact on your students. And so perhaps it's their exam details and statistics. What was the mean on the exam that the technology might be impacting? What was the how was their preparation for the content area? And if you can show that there was no negative impact on your students, and maybe it was improving their impact overall, that's what you need to show. So the key thing when you change a technology or change a format, like if you go to active learning or you change a new learning management system, that there's no negative impact on the students' performance or achievements in the content areas. And you said you had another online one or a hand raise, okay?
Yeah,
Hi,
Gloria, go ahead.
Hello?
Hi,
Can you hear
hi.
me?
Yes,
Hi,
we can.
hello. Good to see you again. Hi. Hi, so my question is about documenting the news addition to a standard IPE and interprofessional education. So I was wondering if it has to be integrated into the didactic, or can this be something that the clinical sites do? Because my program is a post-bac program and it's very impacted in what we teach them in the didactic lecture. But some of my sites already do some interprofessional education. So yeah, so how do I document that? Because there's
lots of flexibility there, Gloria. Thanks for the question. That's a good one. There are lots of ways to do it. You can do it with your didactic content, but if your program is hospital-based or post-bac, then it might only be when they're actually in their clinical presentation. So if you have an opportunity to perhaps pull them aside for an hour when they're in clinicals and do something with the nursing students about specimen collection, then this is an IPE opportunity. So they don't define how it has to be done. They just want to see that you're attempting to integrate it into the curriculum in some way. So yeah, during the clinicals is absolutely fine.
Another question in the chat. Sometimes student graduate employer suggestions are not feasible or educationally sound. Does the NAACLS review committees accept the program director's decision provided the rationale is sound?
Absolutely. And I'll give you an example. They want us to add, like cytogenetics classes to our program. They're like, that's not our MLS thing. Or they want us to change the scheduling of some of our classes. And the university schedule is not something I'm going to be able to change. And so we just say this was their suggestion. And I make sure that I'm transparent with our clinical sites or whoever made that suggestion as well, that this is not feasible. Some of our students wanted block teaching. And in our university, that's not going to work because we have some students taking our classes that are not MLS program students. We have students from biology, we have students from chemistry taking some of our lecture classes, and we have to stay on the university calendar. So if you provide the rationale for why you don't address it or don't accept their suggestion, that's perfectly fine.
Moving on, Gloria, I just out of habit, I muted you. So if you have a follow-up question, raise your hand. Or do you have a follow-up? I saw you unmute.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of, ask, so Janice, so if I set it up to where at each of my clinical sites, they do some kind of IPE, and I have them fill out like a Google form to tell me what they did and how they did it, would that be something that's feasible?
Absolutely. Absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. And you might add a question to there, what did they gain from this? Why did, now do they understand that this is something that's important for them to do? And
Perfect.
you're done. A portfolio type of recording is absolutely perfect.
Great, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Next question in the chat, will these slides be downloadable? Yes, I will add a link to downloadable slides when this video goes up on the NAACLS News, which I'm hoping is sometime next week. Jude, I see your hand up. We're going to take another question from the chat and then we're going to get to you. This one is regarding a small program. I have a really small program, 3 students annually. It's really hard to analyze data based on the cohorts. For example, if one student performs poorly on the BOC in all disciplines, it will drop my averages, but it isn't necessarily a reflection on the program. Any suggestions on how to address this in the narrative?
What I just do is literally discuss exactly that. I say, we only have 3 students. The reason Susie didn't do well on the board exams is because she was a borderline student anyway. She didn't pass the first time, or maybe took twice to pass it. I'm aware of this. I at least address it. Yeah, I know it drops your board exam pass rates down to 67%, but maybe next year it goes back up again. So addressing the elephant in the room is sometimes the biggest thing. They want you to make sure that you are addressing it and trying to do some improvements. So I hope that answers your question. Again, writing it out, discussing it, describing it, defending it is really what we're looking, rather than ignoring it. Okay, we need to make sure you don't ignore it.
All right, Jude, you should be ready to go. You just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, Jude. You have a question?
Yes, I do. Hey, Janice, how are you doing?
Very good. How are you?
Fine, thank you. My question is, I have my students send to me a summary of what they are doing in the clinical lab during their rotations.
Yes.
So I meet with them every week. So, they give me the feedback. They tell me if they have problems. I document all those information.
Right.
Now, for the summary of what they are giving me, where does that come in terms of standard 2 documentations and meeting up with the compliance standard? Because they send to me every week. It is mandatory. Every week they make a summary of what they learned. If they're in hematology, what did you do in hematology last week? Which instrumentations did you use? What was your findings? And they send it to me every week.
Yes.
So where does that fall in my documentation for these students?
It falls in, not quite into graduate, but it is giving you program feedback.
Good.
And it's really current student feedback that you're receiving at this time.
Yes.
And again, this is where, although NAACLS says they want you to have feedback from graduates and feedback from employers, this is another source of feedback that you can add to your list. Again, we said at the beginning that this is the list we were talking about was not an exhaustive list because there are so many ways you can do it. That is an excellent source of good information from your students about what they're experiencing in the clinical site. So I would add it to my program evaluation list of things that I do. It doesn't necessarily meet one of the required ones, but it's a very good additional resource. Does that help?
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Take care. Good luck with you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I think I muted you earlier than I intended, Jude. Okay, so the next question in the chat, what do you do when graduates do not complete their surveys or do not respond to your emails? In those cases, we do not know who their employers are.
Okay, well, a couple of things here. Number one, NAACLS requires only that you report your employment rate based on the students who responded, which is helpful, but when they don't respond, it doesn't really help you get the feedback you need. And that's why I was saying, if you're going out to your affiliates and you're meeting with your current students and you happen to see some of the graduates from the previous year, do a chit chat and see if you can gather some information. What we've ended up doing is, and I'm not sure this is going to work for everybody, we are allowed to, our current students, when they are graduating, they do an exit survey with us. And in that exit survey, we ask them for their personal email and their cell phone. And we tell them how important it is to get responses to surveys. And we have our employment surveys that we do at 1 year is separate than our satisfaction survey. So the employment survey is quick, short, something that we send out by text. They answer quickly at text, I'm employed at this location, and that's all we need to know. And then the satisfaction survey is a little bit longer. So we've improved our response rate on the employment survey by changing it to a quick 3-question survey. That and separate it from the program feedback survey. So that might help you in that particular way. I'm not sure that you're able to do that in your particular facility.
One of our volunteers put something in the chat, and I'm glad she did. Thank you, Jennifer. It's a good thing to mention this now, is that probably a little over a year ago, the NAACLS Board of Directors changed, or I shouldn't say changed, specified the definition of graduate. So
Clarified.
Clarified, thank you.
Yeah.
So when NAACLS says we want graduate feedback, we are looking for graduates that have been
At least
away
3
from the
months.
program for at least 3 months. The reason for this being is the intent is we want to see how the education is benefiting students in the field, and then what kind of changes may need to be made. If we
Right.
have, but you can also interpret graduate as somebody who literally, you know, crossed the stage 10 minutes ago. That kind of feedback, while it could be helpful in one of our optional data point that the standards request, it's not what we're looking for graduates. So graduate feedback needs to be gathered from those graduates that have been away from the program for at least 3 months. I feel like I said that in a convoluted way. Janice, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, let me clarify, because we actually had this issue with nomenclature. Okay, so when NAACLS talks about graduates, you as program directors need to think about them as alumni. They are not your current students who are graduating. So what we did was we relabeled our 2 surveys. We have one survey that is an exit survey. So right when you're finishing the program, you haven't left campus, we're still holding your degree hostage. We have an exit survey, or our university calls them graduate surveys, but it's an exit survey. And then 1 year from now, 6 months to 1 year from now, we send out the survey. We call it an alumni survey to make sure that we're clarifying the terminology. The compliance guide does talk about that, but I think when graduates of your program being alumni might be a little bit more clear to those of you who are doing those surveys. So alumni are people who are long gone. Graduates might be recent people. So keep that in mind. It has to be at least 3 months. I recommend at least 6 months so they have a real perspective of what's going on. And then, get your survey information back at that point.
Okay, this is kind of in conversation with Gloria's question. This is an idea. So it says an idea that this program is implemented is for IPE is to have students participate in a working group meeting, i.e.
Yes.
Antimicrobial stewardship, tumor board, POCT, new instrument installations, and they have a reflection with a rubric and prompts.
Absolutely identical. Well, that's fantastic. One of the things Gloria was saying, when the students are doing their response to that, that's the same kind of thing, collecting the impact of that on them and their reflection on how the activity, what they learn from the activity is very important, more so than the activity itself. There's lots of options for activities. These are excellent suggestions. Thank you so much.
The next question is in reference to IPE, would attending sessions with pathology residents, going to the floors with phlebotomy team to assist, rounding with point of care be considered IPE?
Absolutely. These types of things, basically you're talking about getting out of the lab and talking to other people, other than lab nerds. Okay. Get somebody else. They need to see what nurses do. They need to see what doctors do. They need to see what pathology residents do. They need to see how these other people are interacting in the entire scope of the hospital treatment area. And however you do that, and whatever groups you interact with, are all going to be a positive impact on their learning and their understanding of their own role in the laboratory and in laboratory care. So, you know, it's very important to have some exposure of almost any kind, and multiple kinds like that is absolutely perfect.
We have one more question in the chat, but we have time. If somebody wants to raise their hand or add more. For graduate feedback, are you looking for anything? The chat says 6 months, but I'm going to clean that up in a little bit, but I'll finish the question first.
Yeah.
For graduate feedback, are you looking at anything after 6 months post-graduation, such as 2 years post-graduation? So before I hand it to you, Janice, the NAACLS requirement is anything after 3 months.
Right.
Janice mentioned how she personally feels that 6 months it may
Is
be
more
more
appropriate.
beneficial,
Right.
but the NAACLS requirement is anything after
Is only
3 months. Okay, now I'll hand it over to you, Janice.
We used to have at NAACLS a 5-year, a 1 and a 5-year graduate survey, but you know, it's hard enough to get a hold of them at 6 months or 1 year. So yeah, 5 years kind of went by the wayside. We do run into our students that are 5 years past graduation, and now they're preceptors and they're part of our employee survey. So we're getting it in a different way. There's no formal process to reach out to students for feedback as alumni, 2 years post-graduation, 3 years, 4 years, up to 5 years post-graduation. But we do get feedback, but it's often in the form of the fact that one of our preceptors or one of our advisory board members happens to also be a graduate of our program. Nothing
Yeah,
formal.
yeah, there is no cap. We just need to make sure we are past that 3-month period for them to be considered graduates in NAACLS eyes.
Absolutely.
All right, you're welcome, Nicole. So we'll give it a few more minutes. We don't have anything else. For those of you who will think of something immediately when this call is done, please remember that our DLP information is available
Right.
on the website. Okay, it looks like we're done.
Okay.
Thank you, Janice.
Absolutely.
And
My
again,
pleasure.
allow me to do one more plug where please come say hi. If you're at CLEC, even if you don't have a question about anything, just come say hi to the NAACLS staff. We always love to put faces to the names we hear on the phone calls over the course of a year.
Oops, there's one more.
Just a thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All
Oh,
right.
wait a minute. Jude has a follow-up. So go ahead, Jude. You need to unmute.
Professor Conway, can I send you some emails or something, you know, as I'm preparing standard 2 for NAACLS?
Is this an MLS program?
Yes, it is. Remember we
Okay.
did a volunteer job jointly.
Yeah. It would be best to start with the discipline lead for medical laboratory science, which is Brandy Greenhill.
Okay, yes.
Okay, so Brandy's contact information is on the NAACLS website. So you'll see the tab for MLS and go to her with your questions at first. If she can, all of us kind of work together. So if she cannot answer the question, she may refer you out to one of the other colleagues on that list, but primarily start with Brandy because she's doing the medical lab science discipline lead at this time. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Good luck to you, Jude.
Appreciate that.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. We'll hopefully see you in Atlanta.
All right. Thanks a lot.